Hello, hello. So I want to be brief because obviously you are all here for the main attraction. My wonderful older brother, Clint Smith, and his dear friend, Sarah Kay, who has become a dear friend of mine over the past few years. And I'll just say, I know we all know the news of tonight. I had nothing to do with it. That credit goes completely to my colleagues. I'm currently covering how the Federal Reserve wants you out of your job, or some friends of yours. But in all seriousness, it's been super cool to be the younger brother and the younger friend of two people who are just such kind souls and such brilliant intellects. And you see people who are famous or that are clearly on the trajectory of becoming famous, just sort of luminaries, and you always kind of wonder from a distance, how much of that is for show, how much of that is to get ahead. And obviously I'm biased, but Sarah and Clint really are as honest as they are thoughtful, as sweet as they are smart, and and on and on and on. And so without further ado, I'll let you get to the main attraction, Sarah Kay and Clint Smith, and please just enjoy.
Hi, everybody. I frequently miss entire days caught in my brain's spider webs. But if I happen to look up and notice that there is still time, the darkness still has a little daylight left to swallow, I will ivy up the fire escape to catch whatever embers of the day are still slow dying behind New Jersey. And last week, through the fog of my loneliness, I realized the living room was slippery pink, which I knew meant a light show must be on display. So with a quickness I reserve for emergencies, I scampered to the roof, and sure enough, an explosion of upside-down clementine cotton candy cloud wisps was tie-dyeing the Hudson neon, and I swear I am not a lightweight, but I was color drunk immediately, dizzy with gasp and skyward reaching, hoping my fingers might find a bell I could ring that would summon all of New York City to look up and west. But there was no bell and no one to call, just my own astonishment, still willing to answer after the first ring. How predictable. One good sunset, and I release my nihilism like rose petals behind a bridal gown. Look, I have married my cynicism and renewed my vows, but it didn't stop the streetlights from coming on at the exact moment I passed beneath them, when nobody else was in the park to see it, like the whole city was winking. And yes, I blushed, the way I do whenever someone beautiful flirts with me. I haven't stopped thinking about death. I am just wringing out every last jaw drop from the tissue between heartbreaks. On a long run outside the city, along a highway and miles from any shoreline, I found a starfish alone on the asphalt. An unsolvable mystery with no witness to corroborate, and there I was again, wandering the streets of Bewilderville, population 1. And what else could I possibly do but swing wide the doors of my delight to this patron saint of unbelonging, fragile and whole and so far from home. If you too have been the one nobody asked to dance, I've got a starfish I'd love to introduce you to. And I don't have any proof, but one time the wind or my ancestors or unseasonal warmth carried 3 hawks to my kitchen windowsill to rattle my coffin to cocoon, and 2 of them left, but one of them stayed and eyed me through the glass like a promise or a dare. And so lately, I am trying to pick up when the universe calls. Thanks, everybody. So I'm only going to read 2 poems tonight because the main attraction is sitting to my right. And I want us to get to this beautiful triumph of a book and this beautiful triumph of a person as quickly as we can. But I promised I would read at least a little bit. So here's my 2 of 2. I was trying to come up with, I was like, okay, occasion of new book. And I was like, I wish I had a poem for congratulations on your new book. But I don't have that poem. And then I thought, oh, okay, maybe it's like I could read a poem that was like, congratulations on your new baby book. But I don't have one of those poems either. And poets sometimes get asked to write poems for specific occasions. Or they get asked if they know any poems for specific occasions, like funerals and weddings. And so often do poets get asked to write poems for weddings that is actually a category of poem. It's got a name. It's epithalamian. And I was asked last summer to write a poem for the occasion of some friends getting married. And I figured no one other than the people at this wedding would ever hear this poem. But then I looked at it again today, and I thought, oh, you know what? We could pretend that we are at a wedding because a wedding is an occasion where we're celebrating something new and something beloved. And I was lucky enough to be at Clint's wedding to his beautiful, brilliant wife. And this occasion, we are here to celebrate a book, which is new, and a person who is beloved. So you'll have to go with me on it. This is an epithalamian. Perhaps you have noticed the way someone yawning blooms a yawn in your own mouth, as though it were your idea and not a hand-me-down. The way an ocean wave is not invented out of nothing, but arrives from somewhere else, shifted from one shoreline of the lopsided planet to another, so that every ocean is the same ocean, no matter what edge of it you are dipping your toes in. You can stand on a cliff and watch a storm roll towards you, passed around the globe like wet gossip, one storm begetting another, the way my middle school science teacher told me matter cannot be created or destroyed, just shifted from one state to the next, which is comforting on days you miss the dinosaurs or need to remember that many people had to fall in love with a face at least a little bit like yours in order for yours to get here. Maybe God had a good idea one time, and the rest has all been dominoes. A thunderclap begets a hiccup, begets an undertow, begets your certainty that a face was made for you to love it. But ask the coral reef, who knows we are not good ideas, and definitely not new ones, more like galactic putty smushed into human form, who spend so much of our brief time here losing sight of the storms we came from, the weather that moves through us, that we unleash on everyone else. And who can blame us? There is no shame in forgetting that our atoms once held together some other jellyfish. when her cheek on your pillow makes your skin too electric to be called anything but new. When my grandmother was towards the end of her time in the body I knew her in, she started to lose herself, memory first, but language close behind. She misused words, mixed up phrases, said things incorrectly. When she met someone, instead of saying, "It is a pleasure to meet you," she would say, "It is a pleasure to love you." She understood that what feels unknown is an opportunity for remembering, in which case, in some future, when two red-shouldered hawks see each other for what they think is the first time, they might suddenly recall that there was once a day when we traveled many miles, some of us whole lifetimes, so that we could meet you here in love. And what more evidence will they need? What more evidence do you need that it is a sincere pleasure to love you again and again? It is a sincere pleasure to love and celebrate my dear friend and his new book. Please give a warm welcome to Clint Smith.
The problem with doing a book release event with Sarah Kay is that you don't want to do any of your own poems. You just want to listen the entire time to Sarah do poems. And then you're like, and now my book is out, everybody. Here, it is so wonderful to be able to release this book this week with so many dear friends and so many people who've been, on Tuesday launched with Liz Acevedo, who I've known for over a decade now, and who we were on the same slam poetry team in 2014, and now I feel like we've watched our journeys have followed one another. And we've been on a sort of writing journey together over the last decade, and I think it's a similar thing with Sarah, where we've known each other for almost a decade now. And we would just, it felt like little kid poets, just plopping around in our 20s, do, 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 do. And it's been such a joy and such an honor to be able to share this journey with you, to be on this journey with you, to be able to talk with you about how wild and wondrous and random our lives are. And I'm just very glad that you blessed us with some of your incredible work. And I'm excited to chit-chat with you like we do on FaceTime and text, but in front of all these people. So I am so excited that you all showed up today. And it's a slow news day, so nothing of particular note has happened at all. But part of what Above Ground is doing, and part of what Above Ground is interested in, is thinking about, I keep saying it, but the simultaneity of the human experience. What does it mean to hold joy and wonder and awe alongside a sense of fear, insecurity, despair? What does it mean to be a human moving through the world, trying to form meaningful relationships with people amid the backdrop of social and ecological and political catastrophe? And how do we hold all of that in our bodies? How do we hold all of that in our blood, in our marrow? And so the first poem in this book is entitled All at Once, and it's thinking about that simultaneity, thinking about holding the complexity of the world within us, and what that feels like and what that looks like. I'm glad Sarah went first, because sometimes when I'm doing these things, especially in this sort of venue, typically people sometimes people come to a poetry reading and a person will do a poem, and then the people just stare at them after. And it's wildly unsettling to me. And so Sarah got us warmed up, and it was very clear, please clap after the poem. Even if you think a poem is subpar, just clap. Because it otherwise it's dark, I can't really see you. It's and then the silence, it will be overwhelming. So I appreciate everybody. We come from like the performance tradition, the spoken word tradition, the slam tradition, and like, so if you want to clap or snap or scream like drunkenly from the back, that's how we came up. So we appreciate you. There we go. Somebody took their shots before they came. All at once. The redwoods are on fire in California. A flood submerges a neighborhood that sat quiet on the coast for 3 centuries. A child takes their first steps and tumbles into a father's arms. 2 people in New Orleans fall in love under an oak tree whose branches bend like sorrow. A forest of seeds are planted in new soil. A glacier melts into the ocean and the sea climbs closer to the land. A man comes home from war and holds his son for the first time. A man is killed by a drone that thinks his jug of water is a bomb. Your best friend relapses and isn't picking up the phone. Your son's teacher calls to say he stood up for another boy in class. A country below the equator ends a 20-year civil war. A soldier across the Atlantic fires the shot that begins another. The scientists find a vaccine that will save millions of people's lives. Your mother's cancer has returned, and the doctors say there is nothing else they can do. There is a funeral procession in the morning and a wedding in the afternoon. The river that gives us water to drink is the same one that might wash us away. A lot of what I've been sort of wrestling with over the last few years is what are the sort of catalysts of empathy and what are the blockades to empathy. And I think about the sort of arbitrary nature of birth and circumstance and how so much of what allows us to, or facilitates empathy for us, is our proximity to another, or our perceived proximity, or the proximity that we're told we have to another person or to another group of people. And I think about how that some of that proximity, how so much of that proximity is almost a performance of proximity. It's almost this thing that we're sort of told that these are people, or these are things, or these are moments, these are ideas that are relevant to our lives, and thus we should feel a different sort of level or scale of empathy for. And it always seems so arbitrary. Some men a long time ago drew a line in the sand, and people called it a country, and that is so often what shapes, how we mourn, whether we grieve for people. And so there's some poems in this book that are thinking about that, because, for me, when when my wife and I began starting our family and having our kids, I was thinking about, like, what does it mean to have these moments of, again, joy and wonder and awe amid this sort of larger backdrop of geopolitical chaos and uncertainty, and how, again, do we hold all of that together? What does it mean to be a person who, like, extends that empathy to others while also trying to be present for the people in front of you? And I don't purport to have the answers to those questions. I'm a poet. I just kind of wrestle with them and write them down. But I'm going to read this sort of suite of poems, these 3 that are thinking about that question. So you don't have to clap in between each of the 3. You can just save it for the end. The drone. The drone was once a scrap of metal. The drone looks as if it might be a toy. The drone is not a toy. The drone could have been something else, something other than a killing machine. The drone could have been a house. The drone could have been a spoon. The drone could have been a swing. The drone does not know who it is going to kill next. The drone is going to kill next. The drone has learned to disguise itself as a shard of sky. The drone's hum is a disembodied echo. The drone was mistaken for a star once. The drone renders itself celestial. The drone scoffs at sovereignty. The drone asks, what is a border if I can fly right over it? The drone was built by a man. The drone killed a man and a woman and a child. The drone killed a child and did not see her face. The drone does not see a face. The drone sees a body, and then the body is gone. Pangea. Imagine each continent a splintered tessellation of wayward fragments, each mass of land attempting to jostle itself free. Pangea was the last of the supercontinents, a mass of land that came together and broke itself apart several times before. It should come as no surprise. Don't we all eventually return to something we can lose ourselves inside of? Can we blame the desert for missing the breeze that tumbles across the grassland? Can we blame the tundra for its desire to witness the wrestling of pines? Just the other day, a bomb killed 70 people across the sea and no one around me heard a sound. These days, I find myself blaming Pangea for the sounds I cannot hear. I decry the continents for their careless drift. I detest the tectonic plates for their indifferent quake. I wake up in love with the ocean and fall asleep despising all that it has put between us. Perhaps if the continents had never shaken themselves free, we might find ourselves disabused of this apathy. Perhaps if we could hear the bomb dropping, we might imagine what would happen if it struck our own homes. I am nostalgic for a proximity that may not have mattered. I find myself loathing a miracle. The New York Times reports that 200 civilians have been killed in U.S. military airstrikes, and the man on television calls it unfortunate yet inevitable collateral damage. And I wonder what it is that turns mourning into a metonym or a proclamation of conjecture. And I read his bio, and I see that he has a wife, and I can't imagine he would call it inevitable if her body were pulled from the quiet implosion of rubble. And I see that he has a son, and I can't imagine he would call the boy who bears his name collateral in someone else's war. And I see that he has a daughter, and I think of what it might mean for someone to render her final breath in inevitability of realpolitik. And I understand what he means. I know he means that war is callous and unforgiving, that a militant can surround himself with a dozen women and children so that the pilot must decide between the target and the ache of his own heart's detonation. I do not misunderstand the cruelty of war, but I regret the way we talk about its casualties, how their lives become tacit admonitions, how the tyranny of a border made out of thin air means bombs are only dropped on one side of it. But I too have felt the empathy corrode inside my most cavernous parts, have taken the quarters from my pocket and used them to cover my collusion. Who among us has not used spare change to cover our contrition, or laid a wreath of sympathy atop the bodies of names we do not know? And I'm not sure what it means for us, not to be the one to fire the bullet, but to behave as if the bullet always belonged in that chest and not our own. And so thinking about the sort of arbitrary nature of things, like the thing about kids is they ask so many questions about everything. And part of what it reveals is that like you have children, and then you quickly realize that like none of us have any idea what we're doing. And you're like, oh, my parents had no idea what they were doing. They were just making it up. We're making it up. I couldn't believe this moment where we were in the hospital, and when there's this beautiful moment, my wife gives birth to my son and my daughter, and then we're in the hospital, and the nurses are taking care of us. We're like, wow, this was amazing, da-da-da. And then they give you the baby, and they say goodbye. And you just like take the baby, and you get in the car, and we're looking at each other, and we're like, what are we supposed to do? Where's the manual? Where's the orientation? Like, there's nothing. Nothing can really prepare you for the sorts of what it means to be a parent, but also like the types of questions that your kids ask, and they ask these questions about everything, and sometimes about things that you don't know, that you didn't even know you had permission to ask, and that's one of the things about young children. My children are 5 and 4. Is there is an endless sense of curiosity, but a curiosity so endless that it recognizes that you can ask questions, again, sort of about anything, and they'll ask me, and I'll be like, I don't, how does the garbage disposal work? I'm like, I don't know, man. I just press the button. Like, but there's so many layers to it. And so a lot of these poems are also thinking about like questions my kids ask or things that they say. So I'm gonna read this poem because Sarah said she liked it. And I haven't read this one out loud, so this will be fun. Prehistoric questions. During your bath time, each of us holds a small plastic dinosaur engaged in battle. Your T-Rex hides behind mountains of suds, while my Spinosaurus dips behind the water in preparation for a surprise attack. After the battle has finished, as I begin scrubbing the dirt out of your hair, you ask me how the dinosaurs died. I reach the washcloth behind your ears and tell you that one day, an asteroid the size of a mountain struck the earth, which sent clouds of soot into the sky so vast that it blocked most of the sun. Without the sun, all the plants died, which meant all the animals that eat the plants died, which meant all the animals that eat the animals that eat the plants died. And I think this is mostly right, but my hands are covered in bathwater and my phone is in another room. You are silent for a moment, and as I begin to rinse the soap from your body, you ask me if this is how we will die too, at the hands of a giant asteroid that comes to Earth and wipes out everything we see. I turn your body toward me, hold your shoulders in my hands, and I tell you that no asteroid will be coming to Earth anytime soon. I speak with a certainty I do not have. I reassure you with language that floats away as soon as it leaves my lips. I lift you from the tub, wrap the towel around you, and you ask me how we will die. I pause. I feel my heart tremble with all the answers I do not know. Part of me wants to say something about heaven and angels and forever. Part of me wants to say something about how life one day ending makes the whole thing so worth living. I realize how unprepared I am to talk to you about how all of this will end for us, and how precarious and uncertain our time on this fragile planet is. I tell you that I hope all of us will live for a very long time, which is why you need to eat your carrots. I don't know if that was the right thing to say, but at the moment, it was all I had. You squinch your nose and say, "Carrots, yuck." And I rub the towel around your wet curls and kiss your head. A lot of what I'm trying to do in this book also is like, you know, our friend Safiel Hilo has this, you know, really wonderful thing where I used to like complain like these old, because we've been doing poems for so long, they're like these old poems of us on YouTube. And a teacher will be like, oh, like I taught this poem for, you know, what's like, I'm not gonna say it because then you're gonna Google it. And then I'm like, don't. But like, they'll be like, oh, we taught, and it's just, and I'll be like, oh, that poem, like it represents such a, it was 10 years ago, it was 12 years ago, it was like such a different version of me in so many ways, like who I was, my sensibilities, my politics, it was a different version of me. And I think it can be so easy for artists to look back at the things they used to create and look back in a sort of cringy way. But our friend Safia always talks about how what poems can be are these time capsules that like hold these moments of who you were in a specific moment of time, how you saw the world, how you made sense of the world, the things you were engaging with. And that's like a much more generous framing than like those poems are trash. So we go with that. But I love that idea of like the poem as time capsule. The poem is like an archival project. And what I wanted to do with this is like archive these moments with my kids, these moments of the way that fatherhood has sort of newly animated how I make sense of the world. And one of those things that we love to do is have dance parties in our kitchen. And unfortunately, my kids have no rhythm, which is like very cute and delightful now. It will not be if that continues into the future. My wife, we're like dancing, do, and then we look at each other, we're like, oh God, like this is rough. We're gonna have to figure out. But they are delightful nonetheless. And this poem is called Dance Party. Sometimes in the evenings after dinner, After the spaghetti has been slurped and I have bribed the broccoli into their bellies, I give both of my children the look. When my eyes meet theirs, they know what time it is. They push in their chairs, they stretch their legs, and we move the table to the far end of the dining room to clear space for what we all know is coming. Alexa, play the post-dinner dance party playlist. And within seconds, Martha Wash's booming voice rolls like thunder over our bodies. Everybody dance now. The electronic keyboard and the drums meet in the middle of the room like two dinosaurs ready to claim the kitchen as their own. Immediately, the jumping begins, and my daughter is flinging her limbs like an offbeat octopus, hands slapping the air behind her as if she is trying to smack anyone who enters her sacred space. I turn around, and my son is doing the robot, or is being eaten by a robot, or is trapped in a universe where robots take over the bodies of little boys in peanut butter pajamas. Nonetheless, there is a robot somewhere. And my children, bless them, have not yet learned how to clap on the 2 and 4. So I laugh, but also cringe, as their small hands make a mockery of the melody around them. Now, halfway through the song, everyone is jumping, and I, caught up in the ecstasy of this moment, fall to the ground and convince this no longer young body that it is a good idea to start doing the worm. And when my children see me, their eyes become pools of possibility, and it is clear that they see this as a clarion call to climb onto my back. And now, here we are, this strange trifecta, this unlikely trio, a robot and an octopus riding on the back of a worm who will certainly need some Tylenol before bed. And it is in this moment that their mother comes home. And when she opens the door, everyone is screaming. The speakers are blasting, and the percussion is shaking every wall around us. We look up at her, and she looks down at us, and we have no explanation for this strange scene, only an invitation for her to join. And I will read one more, and then we'll chat. This poem, it felt important to me to write to name that even the act of writing a poem, writing a book of poetry largely centered on fatherhood, might be deemed worthy of celebration in ways that poems and collections of poetry written by women and written by mothers are not always lifted up and celebrated in the same way, which I think is reflective of a larger sort of sexist and patriarchal reality in which men are praised for doing things that they are supposed to do in ways that women and mothers are not. It's a conversation my wife and I have all the time, and I think it's something that is important for me to name in this project, to name for myself every single day, because it can be very easy to get caught up in the sort of affirmation of people who are telling you how amazing you are, like how incredible it is, and I think it's one of those things where it's not so much to say that men or fathers should not be celebrated or should not be praised for doing things for their kids. It's just to say, why aren't we extending that same praise, that same celebration to mothers and to women in the same way? So I wanted to write a poem about that, if I can find it, and then we'll hop into discussion. Gold stars. On the days when I am out alone with my children, I'm made to feel as if I am a saint or a god or the undisputed best father of all time. What I mean is that when we walk into CVS and my daughter is wrapped onto my chest and my son toddles at my side, people stop and look and gasp and point and walk up to me and ask me to shake my hand. Men pat me on the back. Women touch their shoulders and touch their hearts. The manager at the front of the store comes onto the loudspeaker and says, "Excuse me, may I have everyone's attention? On aisle 7, you can get 3 boxes of detergent for the price of 2, And on aisle 5, there is an incredible father running errands alone with his children. Everyone in the store burst into applause, and someone walks over to hand me a crown and a ribbon and a coupon for an all-you-can-eat buffet. Just the other day, a woman at the park told me how wonderful it is that I took time to babysit my children. Just the other day, I changed a dirty diaper and someone said, "Praise Jesus." Just the other day, a man on the road stopped his car in the middle of the street, rolled down his window, and told me that I was Father of the Year. It's not to say I don't appreciate the sentiment. It's just that this man has no idea what kind of father I actually am. All he saw was me and 2 children and a diaper bag teeming with crackers. And it's not to say I don't want people to tell me I'm doing a good job. It's just that I am praised for the sorts of things no one ever thanks my wife for. I am adorned in a garland of gold stars for simply being in this body.
It is such a joy to sit with another poet who has gotten their ass kicked in poetry slams by Elizabeth Acevedo. Just a real treat for us all.
It's funny because we had that event, and I was like, and yeah, in 2014, I like won the DC Poetry Slam, and she was like, "No, you didn't." She was like, "That was me." I think my memory really convinced me that I did not win. Liz won. She wins all the things. It's fine. She's great. Read her books.
Yeah.
National Book Award, DC Poetry Slam champ. It seems like she's had enough, but trying to share the wealth.
Well, before she was doing that, she was a teenager growing up in New York City, beating me in youth poetry slams. So we've really come a long way, all of us. I'm really glad that you read those poems that you picked. I think one of the things that I love about this really good book is the way that I cried and laughed poem by poem. I was showing you in the back, and this is really true. I have like little notes to myself, and there's like a stretch in the book where I'm like laughing out loud like you, alone to myself, and then full crying, and then flipping the page, and then laughing, and then crying, and then laughing, and then crying. But there's no whiplash because you're so accurate in what you said is kind of the project of the book, which is to show how we're kind of encountering all of this all the time, everywhere, all at once, if you will.
Everywhere, if you will.
And I just want to start by asking about like the way that the book is, if you read it from beginning to end, is like very meaningful in the ups and downs that it takes, and the tones and the joys and the sorrows. But I assume you did not write them that way. I know that like the putting them in this order is the creation of the book and the creation of the arc of the book. Yeah. What I want to know is, do you have bouts of writing where it's like despair week, and then like a month of joy, and then when you mix them up, we get this book? Or where do they come in the order?
Despair week sounds terrible. No, it's not really the case that like I wrote the book and was like, all right, we need to like sprinkle more despair here, and then like a little bit more joy here. Where's a little levity? I mean, I think, as you know, like we write far more poems than are what end up in the book.
Thankfully.
Thankfully, for all of your sake. So there's like 70 or 70 something poems in this book. And there were hundreds of poems written to get to those 70. And poets, we do this thing called 30 for 30. I've done many of these with Sarah. I very rarely complete them. It's like you try to write a poem every day for the month. And so the idea is that you end with 30 poems. I usually like peter out at 17. And I'm like, I can't go any longer. And Sarah's like, get up, keep going. This is like all over email. And I'm like, all right. But then if you get to 30, like, if you write 30 poems in a month, 3 of them are good, right? And so what is true is that like you're always writing, you're always excavating, you're always sort of, you have to write those poems to get to the poems that ultimately are in the book. And it's not a neatly sort of demarcated thing. It's not a thing where, you know, it's a long stretch of joy or a long stretch of despair. I mean, in some ways it might happen organically. But it is true, like part of what I wanted the book to reflect was the coexistence of all of those things, right? Like the emotional texture of our lives is so messy and so complicated, right? And there are huge like geopolitical realities happening all around us while we're here laughing in this room. That, you know, you can be pushing your child in the swing at the park and then get a call from someone saying that a loved one has a terminal illness. There are endless examples, and so my writing process really reflects the sort of messiness of the world we live in. And then when I'm putting the project together, part of what it was trying to do is both capture a sort of loose chronological sort of order of like from conception of our firstborn to their lives now, you know, as a 5-year-old and 4-year-old. And so the sort of backdrop of the poem, the things that anchor the poem are sort of watching the journey of me watching my kids go from like embryos to babies to toddlers to little humans who walk and talk and you know, ask questions about the garbage disposal, and I think that I wanted that to be the anchor, and then to have interspersed so many of the sort of, you know, the larger macro, geopolitical, ecological questions that I'm constantly wrestling with, as I am also simultaneously having these moments with my kids.
What's interesting to me is that you're describing like a real, like you said, you're with your kid and then you get the phone call of this and you're thinking about the geopolitical context. That's so seemingly scattered, right? Which is how life feels when you're living it. Mm-hmm. But to write a poem and to raise a child too requires like an incredible amount of presence, mm-hmm. right? You can't be writing a poem and distracted at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you can't be answering your son's question in the bath and be answering the phone also. And so maybe that's why there isn't a whiplash in this book. I'm like trying to find out how the gears work in here. But somehow even in relaying what is a lot of chaos and all at once, you are still able to place us so fully and solidly in a presence in each poem and let us stay there for a little while. And we have these like small visitations. I don't know, do you practice mindfulness? Do you practice present stuff?
I think for me, the poems are my version of mindfulness. I mean, I think that I'm still like working on cultivating like a more proactive mindfulness presence, but like really like poems are for me the act of paying attention to a moment, an idea, a feeling, and it's interesting because in some ways like the act of writing the poem about these like daily, repetitive, quotidian parts of our lives, granular, teeny, minuscule aspects of our lives are like that is like the process of doing so. When you write a poem about the dance party, you write a poem about making French toast with your kids, you write a poem about watching them go down the slide at the park, you write a poem about bath time, you write, you know, these things that happen a lot. I think when I write about it and dig into it and spend time with that granularity, that specificity, it makes me more fully appreciate it. It makes me more present for the next time that happens. And it's not to say that I'm perfect, because like sometimes you're tired and you're like, you need to go to bed now. It's like 2 hours past your bedtime. But I think it does for me remind me of how fleeting it is, right? Like how quickly it can go. I have this poem in there that's the title poem of the book, and it's about when the cicadas came to DC, Maryland, And this was, I guess, like a year and a half ago. Did they come to New York? Did the cicadas come were they here? It was like in Maryland, they were just they were everywhere. I mean, they were like, it was so loud, there's the hum of the cicadas was just like omnipresent for weeks. And I will always remember like watching how my kids, who were then 2 and 4, like they went out and there's these cicada carcasses like everywhere. And you like step out and you're like stepping on the exoskeletons of cicadas everywhere, and it's something that can feel they were really scared of them at first because they didn't know they were like these bugs, they're all over, they're on the ground. But then they realized that they don't bite, and they like started collecting them like in their little Halloween buckets, like they were treasure. And they started like doing like, who can get the most cicadas? And they're like running around, and then they started like throwing cicadas at each other. And I was like, this escalated so quickly. But I had this moment watching them where I was like, my kids are 2 and 4. The next time the cicadas come back, they will be 21 and 19. And it's the most cliche thing in the world.
And
like,
you're going to be telling
parenting.
that story, and they're going to be like, Dad,
Oh, God.
not the cicada
not
story.
the cicada story, truly. Find another bug. God, you're obsessed with these cicadas. But I think that it happens so fast. And it, like, you know, it's the thing people say, the days are long, but the years are short. And for me, like writing that poem makes me more fully appreciate almost like the singularity of that moment. Like how that moment with my those little humans walking around collecting cicadas and putting them in buckets will never happen again. I mean, maybe when they're 21 to 19, that'd be interesting if that's their vibe. Like, I mean, I'd be here for it. Yeah, I don't know. So I think it helps make me more present and more fully appreciative of those tiny moments that can be so easy to overlook.
That is such a perfect lead into what I wanted to ask about. You almost half answered it there, but I bet you have more to say, which is I want to ask about the way that having children has changed the way you think about time, specifically because you have a poem that I love that's in this book, but was written, it was like one of the older poems in the book about the notion of people saying we have been through worse before, and recognizing the way that like many people don't survive to see the future that people think is coming, and how you have written about before, and I've heard you talk about when you think about the way that people have fought for justice and for abolition, and have fought these like very big fights that they did not know if they would be alive to see come to fruition, and fought anyway.
Yeah.
And the understanding of working towards something that you might not see in your lifetime is such a way of understanding time.
Yeah.
I also think that you write with this unbelievable ancestral presence, right? You bring your ancestors with you and include them often in the room. And this book, you're really facing your children a lot of the time. And you're talking about the way like you can stay inside one moment. I'm just curious about the way you are thinking about time, the way you're experiencing time with them or near them.
I think that there's a couple ways to think about that. I think there's the sort of practical or the just logistical way to think about time when you have kids, in which there's just like not enough of it. And I have these moments all the time. Me and my wife were like, "What did we do with all that time before?" Like we were like, "What did we like?" It felt like, because you have kids and like so much of your time is spent like, you know, like going to birthday parties, going to like eating the cupcakes and eating the Domino's pizza, and it's like another birthday party with the cupcakes and the pizza and the park. So like I was like, we used to be out here with like bottomless mimosas on Saturdays. Used to be, you know, wake up and now it's like, what are you doing this weekend? Going to the birthday party, like Domino's pizza, cupcakes. That's like
You're
That's the
keeping
club
Domino's
now.
in business is what
We're
you're doing.
keeping Domino's in business. Papa John's if you're feeling like a little spicy. So there's just, I mean, your time, you are sharing your time. And you, for me, like there was a huge sort of, I had to be very proactive in like recalibrating my sense of how I use my time and really like reassessing and really fighting against sort of limited conceptions, narrow conceptions, distorted conceptions of what like quote unquote productive uses of time was. Because I think like living in a system of like, capitalism can just make you feel like you have to be productive or doing things all the time. And like if you're not using your time to like, become, you know, to further your professional ambitions or to become like smarter or to become, you know, to do these things that you're not using it well. And I think that I had to really like intentionally push back against the feeling that certain things that weren't tied toward those sort of macro capitalistic conceptions of productivity were like the most productive, right? It's those moments where you're like on the ground pretending to be a brachiosaurus with your kids. And that like that, there is nothing more productive than that. But that's all, but the thing is, I thought that when you had kids that it just like clicked and that like it happened, like some chemical thing shifted and like, you're like, oh, like now I have work-life balance. And it doesn't, it doesn't work like that. And it honestly, like that was one of the hardest parts of learning to be a good parent and trying to be a good parent is that like, I feel like I was in go, 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 grind, grind, grind mode. And we had kids and like, and that, you can do that, you can keep doing that, but like that's not gonna make you a good co-parent, it's not gonna make you a good partner, and I had to really be intentional about that. So on that level, there's that. But you alluded to the other thing, which is that so much of this book is born out of so much of what I was thinking about and how the word is passed, which is to say that.
Wait a second, hold please. I know that it's, sometimes I forget, like Clint is one of the most frustratingly brilliant people I know, such that it is possible that you're at this event and you're like, wait, Clint the poet writes not poetry? Or you're like an avid reader of his work in The Atlantic and you're like, hold on, this Clint writes poems? Or you've watched him on Crash Course and you're like, historian dad Clint is also, you know, like there's so many worlds that you might know Clint's work from, which is very exciting, and you hopefully have come here from all these different sides. But How the Word is Passed was the nonfiction book of the year, was the most celebrated. Yes, absolutely. Was its own tremendous triumph, and you worked on that for a really long time. And while you were working on that, what happened?
Well, that's very generous of you. Generous interlude.
You were just going to let it slide past. You were going to be like, I wrote this other book anyway.
I was thinking a lot about how, you know, first enslaved people came to this country in the British colonies that would become this country in 1619. Slavery ended formally in 1865. But what's true is from the moment enslaved people arrived on these shores, they were fighting for freedom, they were fighting for liberation, they were fighting for emancipation. But that also means what you alluded to, right, is this idea that so many people were fighting for something they knew they might never see themselves, but fought for it anyway, because they knew that someday someone would. And I think about how my life, how my children's lives are only possible because of generations of people who fought for something they knew they would never see, but they fought for it anyway because they knew that someday me and my children would. And I think about how like my dance parties, yeah. And I think about how like my dance parties with my kids, the French toast we make on Sundays, the Wild Kratts we watch, you know, in the mornings, how Peppa Pig, you know, obsessions, how those things are only possible our lives are only possible, our existence as it is, like those moments of daily like interaction and daily small manifestations of the love we share. Like this world is only possible because of all those generations of people. So I think I always feel I feel that history all the time, and it doesn't feel like a weight. It doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like I just feel sort of awash in gratitude, right, for these people that I will never know who fought to make my life as it exists possible. And I'm always thinking about what sort of responsibility does that bestow upon me, does that bestow upon my children, to sort of build the sort of world that we want to see, but also to recognize that we might not see it ourselves. And I think when you have kids, part of what you're trying to do is like instill that sense of responsibility without overwhelming them. And it's a delicate balance, and I think we're always doing our best to get it right, but that sort of, as you said, like ancestral and historical sense of time and of sacrifice and of struggle, and like what struggle has made possible, what that struggle has made possible for me, for us, it's always on my mind.
I think you can draw a line, or you can see the through line if you're an avid Clint Smith reader and read everything that he ever writes. You can see how one project sort of informs the next project, even when they're in different forms. What is it in this book that you found that was new that you didn't have with the previous books?
I mean, the thing about having kids is that you almost rediscover the world through their eyes, right? And I think that was the coolest thing. That one of the epigraphs in the book is my son, and he's basically like, have you ever really looked at a ladybug? And it comes from this moment where there was randomly, it was locked down. I was like, spent so much time in my office at home, and there was this random like ladybug infestation in our house. And there was like all these ladybugs. I think the seasons changed and the ladybugs got confused and they came inside. And so like I came into the room and there were like all these ladybugs like all over my room. And so I like grab a magazine and I'm like chasing the ladybugs around. I was like, get out of here, ladybugs. And my son comes in, he's like 3 years old, and he's like watching, I'm like running around doing this, and he's like, Dad, have you ever really looked at a ladybug? Meanwhile, I'm like on top of the chair being like, ah. And I was like, I should put the magazine down now. And it's just, there's so many of those moments where you're like, have I ever really looked at a ladybug? And he's like looking at, he's like, look at it's got polka dots on its back. Like, why don't we have polka dots on our back? And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know how the garbage disposal works either, but there's so many moments like that where your kids give you the opportunity to like look at the world with new eyes. And I think that's what felt unique about this project. In all the books, I'm always thinking about holding seemingly dichotomous realities alongside one another, or things that exist in tension with one another. So in Counting Descent, what it was thinking about
First poetry book.
The first book poetry was like coming of age as a young black man in this country, written in the sort of early days of the Black Lives Matter movement, where we felt like we were seeing just Black death incessantly in front of us, like Black people killed at the hands of the state all the time, every time you open your phone, every time you turn on the TV, and what it meant to experience that at the same time that I was like meeting and falling in love with the person who would become my wife. And like, what does it mean to walk through the world, both falling in love and also carrying this like ever-present sense of despair and grief, and how the word is passed. I'm thinking about how America is a place that's provided unparalleled, unimaginable opportunities for millions of people across generations in ways that their own ancestors could have never imagined, and has also done so at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people who've been intergenerationally subjugated and oppressed. And both of those things are the story of this country. It's not one over here, one over there. You get to pick this one and not pick that one. You have to hold both of those truths alongside one another. And this is the same sort of thing. I think, again, the simultaneity. our experiences, of parenthood, of being a person. And so I think that's like a project that I carry through every book that I write, everything that I do. It's just, I just like, how can we reject the idea that like we only have to experience the world in one way or make sense of the world in one way? Because that's not reflective of the complexity of the world we live in.
That was a really good answer, and also this book you got to be funny.
I think that was How the Word Is Passed wasn't funny. No, not full of levity at every turn.
I'll tell you what was funny is how every person that reads that chapter has the same instinct that I had when I read that chapter, which is, where is Billy, and is he taking care of you, and are you okay? I was at a event you did, and I had like other people ask the same question, and I was like, yeah, all of us were experiencing that chapter.
Yeah.
It's not funny, but it's funny that all of us were experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, the chapter she's talking about is when I went to a Sons of Confederate Veterans Memorial Day celebration. And I told my wife, I was like, I'm gonna go to this Sons of Confederate Veterans Memorial Day celebration. She was like, no, you're not. And she was like, you can only go if Billy goes with you. And like, is Billy here? Billy here? He's around somewhere. But like, he was like, I texted Billy, I was like, we got it, like, will you come with me to the Sons of Confederate Veterans Memorial? And he was like, bet. He didn't say bet, he don't talk like that. But like, he was like, yes, like we're gonna do it. And like, he held me down. And we went and had this like wild experience that we will never forget.
And neither will the rest of us that read it. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that folks from the audience asked. Thank you, by the way, everyone. How are you guys doing? Is everybody okay out there? Okay. Okay, this is a nice one. Someone would like to know, what books inspired you and made you feel the most loved when you were younger?
The most loved when I was younger. I mean, I loved the Dr. Seuss books. I love, what the answer to that question is that my mom read the first 5 Harry Potters to us out loud.
Wow.
Yeah. So we would all go in her room every evening, and she would read, I don't know if she read a full chapter, but like she would read from Sorcerer's Stone up to, I don't remember what like the 4th or 5th one was, but she read aloud, like the whole thing, and it was just this, it was like over the course of years, and it felt so, that was so special. Like we would like she'd sit on her bed, and we'd like sit on the floor, and she would read the stories about wizards to us, and it was so, it felt like such a specific and wonderful expression of her love for us, and like instilled this love of reading. And also like, I think the experience of being old, because I wasn't like a kid when she was doing that. Like we were, my siblings maybe were a little bit younger, but like, I think this was into my like preteens and maybe early teenage years. And like, I think there's something about like being read to or like hearing books aloud that as we get older, we sort of are told you like let go of, or people don't do it for you anymore, or like even the way people think about audiobooks, you're like, oh, is it like real read? It's like weird because when we're young, we get read to, and then it just kind of peters out and stops. And it was just so, it just meant so much that like, even when I was 13 or 14, that like my mom was like still reading these books to us because it was time and to experience literature orally. I'm sure like, if I'm going to talk about it with my therapist, it's like something to do with how I like came to slam and how I came to think about literature as this thing that should be alive and exist in the air and exist and like fall off of your lips and exist in your body. So yeah, that's, I think that would be my answer.
Good answer.
Yeah.
This is not a question from the audience, but before I forget it, I have to say it. So Clint and I have a tradition where we do a show together with 2 other poets that we love every year. Hanif Abdurraqib and Anis Mojgani. And it's coming up in
Yes.
May 3rd.
Only a few weeks.
In a
Yeah.
few weeks.
Come see us again.
Come see us again if you didn't get enough.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we tease Clint about is, and if you've come to that show, you've heard us tease him, and we'll probably tease him again. But it's a show with 4 of us splitting the bill, right? And we have a phrase which is, uh-oh, he's pulling a Clint. And it doesn't have to be Clint that's pulling a Clint. Anyone could be pulling a Clint. But the phrase, specifically when we're using it in that context, is that Clint has this incredible tendency where he will talk for 13 minutes before sharing a 2-minute poem. And that's not, the wildest part is not the talking before a poem, because many people can talk for a long time before. The real talent is the fake out, where he'll be like, he'll give an introduction and then he'll be like, all right, so this is a poem about that. But before I start, I just want to say, and I'm telling you, you think that you are like, okay, and now. No, there's another plot twist. Anyway, all of that teasing is to say that I was thinking about how we use that phrase like, oh, pulling a Clint, and we know what it means, and it's like a roast. But I have been reflecting on, I think, if I'm being more like truthful, pulling a Clint to me is you have learned so much. You are maybe the smartest person I know. You know so much about so many worlds, topics, fields, literal PhD level of studying and reading and readership and active readership. And when you're talking to us, whether through text, through poem, through essay, through nonfiction, through live voice, you're never talking above us, and you know exactly how to bring what you've learned to the person you're actually talking to. And when it's in a poem and it's facing your child, you're talking to your child, and it's in the form of what a child needs to receive that information. When you're writing a book for high school-aged Clint, it's what high school-aged Clint can understand and hear. You know, you're so good. It's almost like, you know the Mary Poppins bag, right? How like, have you seen that movie?
The new one or the old one?
Either one.
Oh, yeah.
If you haven't watched it with the kids, you'd
The
be
new one
surprised.
has Lin-Manuel Miranda.
It's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. I need to watch that.
Heard of him. Anyway, the Mary Poppins bag concept, if it's been a while, is like she's packed it with all these things, but then at any moment she can pull something out, and it doesn't make any sense how it could come out of that bag, but it's exactly what you need in that moment. And if I never remember to say it, I wanted to say it, that like the way you find a way to share what you have learned and what you know in language that is for us, and it makes us feel like we're special because it's for us and not above us, is very special, and is what actually pulling a Clint is. Are we done? Did we do time?
Yeah.
We did it.
So much earnestness.
Wait, I have one last question. Every year, brilliant, wonderful high school teachers do this fun thing sometimes during March, where they do a March Madness poetry bracket, where they pick 2 poems and put them up against each other, and then I think the students vote on who.
Well, no, they put like 64 poems.
Right,
Yeah,
sorry,
or
yes.
30, yeah.
I know how brackets work, okay.
Sports. Yeah.
Anyway, and you and I are frequently paired up against each other, though having never actually competed against each other in a real slam.
True.
And you talked earlier about sometimes there are old poems of yours that get dragged up that you're like, oh no, why did you pull that up? So my question is, if you got to pick which of your poems you're putting forward in the March Madness bracket,
Oh, man.
what are you putting forward? A game, leave it all on the court.
Oh, leave it all on the
Metaphors with sports.
Sarah's gonna just start being like, hat trick, triple double, dribble.
This is what we like to call an assist.
Look at you. Look at you. There we go. That's so funny. I don't know. I think I love reading the dance party poem. I just think it's like it's so fun. Like that's some of the funnest times after. What's not included in the dance party poem is like the come down afterwards.
That Tylenol?
It's just not my come down, like the children. Like it's like you like injected them with like cocaine and then all of a sudden you're like, time for bed, and they're like, what? Like, and then the post dance part, the dance party is amazing. What comes right after it is like brutal. But I love that poem because I love those moments. So throw that against Walt Whitman and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, everybody, you better go buy this book. I BYOTB, brought my own tote bag so that I can buy several of them. Don't leave here without a bunch of them, please. And otherwise, give it up for our good pal, Clint Smith.